Appearing as early as 1976, the adventure game is one of the most significant genres in the video game industry's 40-year history. Beginning as simple lines of text and keyboard inputs, releases like Mystery House in 1980 and King's Quest in 1984 brought imagery and eventually color to the genre. What distinguished adventure games from the rest of the market was a lack of combative gameplay. Classics like The Seventh Guest and The Secret of Monkey Island focused less on twitch-based action and more on stumping players with logic puzzles and brain teasers. Without an attack button, adventure games turned ordinary activities into engaging gameplay sequences, like cooking, playing piano, and even arguing. Though they found moderate success on the personal computer market in the medium's early years, adventure games had all but died out by the end of the 20th century, fatally wounded by the arrival of Doom in 1993 and the resulting rise of the first-person shooter. The call to adventure was falling on deaf ears, and it would take an exciting new angle to turn the genre's fate around. Meanwhile, in Japan, adventure games had taken on a shape that was, in more ways than one, far more visible. Beginning in 1983 with the Portopia serial murder case for the NEC PC, the visual novel had steadily grown into one of the most popular genres in Japan's PC market. Unlike most Western adventure games, visual novels were primarily played from a first-person perspective, featuring full, front-facing character portraits, in the vein of early RPGs like 1980s Wizardry. Without a protagonist to animate, or even program, visual novels presented a kind of game design that allowed an immersive and even intimate experience for players at an affordable cost for developers. Although visual novels would come to be most commonly associated with dating simulators, games like Famicom Detective Club and Snatcher imbued the burgeoning genre with the foundations of pulp mystery literature. Many of these so-called graphic adventure games featured branching dialogue options, allowing players to interrogate characters and even influence the story's outcome. The visual novel genre met its watershed moment with the release of the innovative and deeply risque You-Know, which sold over 100,000 copies less than 3 months after its launch in 1996. That same year, Japanese console and arcade giant Capcom was among the many major game developers taking advantage of the industry's recent shift to 3D. Resident Evil's release on the Sony PlayStation brought polygonal zombies to the console with gusto, igniting survival horror as it's known today. The game's success prompted both Capcom and Resident Evil creator Shinji Mikami to lean into the genre with a spiritual sibling series entitled Dino Crisis, taking cues from one of the most prominent nerdy fixtures of the 90s. Directing the project was 26-year-old Shu Takumi. The young go-getter joined the company in 1994, working on low-profile region-exclusive games before moving to Capcom's Production Studio 4. Though he was demoted halfway through directing Dino Crisis for his lack of experience, Takumi was unexpectedly brought back to direct the game's sequel, Dino Crisis 2, which went on to meet critical and commercial success. Around that time, Capcom restructured its development house, putting small teams of young developers on new IPs with modest budgets. Pleased with Takumi's work on Dino Crisis 2, Shinji Mikami assigned the young creative one of the new development teams to make, as Takumi later put it, whatever he wanted. What Mikami didn't know was that Takumi had originally joined Capcom to develop adventure games, whose potential was strong but whose output he found unsatisfying. Takumi spent his youth submerged in crime fiction, reading the works of Tsumao Awasaka, Ellery Queen, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, among others. He sought to bring the joys of navigating those novels into a playable context, ideally for a wide audience. With years of amateur writing and a whole game's worth of directing experience under his belt, the young man of mystery got to work. Saddled with a small budget and the unfamiliar technology of Nintendo's upcoming Game Boy Advance, Takumi initially conceived a visual novel starring a detective, with gameplay focusing on interrogations. But as he developed the concept, he realized his idea was just too conventional. He didn't want occasional player agency like so many visual novels before. He wanted something more active and stimulating. Instead of simply scrolling through dialogue options, he hoped players would use their own deductive reasoning to find the truth themselves. To achieve that level of engagement, Takumi had to break free from tradition. Abandoning his detective game, Takumi considered what other professions include questioning witnesses and identifying lies in a similar vein to interrogations, and quickly found his answer. Instead of a hard-boiled gumshoe, players would assume the role of a hot-blooded defense attorney, using evidence to contradict false testimony in court. The idea was risky, and Mikami even warned Takumi against it, claiming the unexciting premise wouldn't draw an audience. Takumi was unfazed. The 7-person development team was given 6 months to complete the project. It was finished in 10. Gyakuten Saibon, directly translated as Turnabout Trial, was released for the Game Boy Advance in Japan on October 12, 2001. Just 7 months after the system's launch. Takumi led the development team as director, planner, and scenario writer. It was produced by Atsushi Inaba, who would spend the majority of the 2000s producing other new Capcom IPs like Beautiful Joe and Okami. Capcom employees Noriyuki Utani and Masakatsu Endo played the part of programmers, industry newcomer Masakazu Sugimori composed the game's music, and audio engineer Atsushi Mori was responsible for sound effects. Characters and backgrounds were designed by Capcom artist Kumiko Suekane and freelance illustrator Tatsuro Iwamoto. Suekane's most famous contribution is the game's protagonist, 23-year-old rookie defense attorney Ryuichi Naruhodo, whose last name is the Japanese term for the phrase, "I understand." Though it would take him 4 years to leave Japan, Ryuichi and his debut game would eventually reach an international audience under a different name, Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney. Ace Attorney was divided into 4 episodic cases, chronicling the chaotic beginnings of Phoenix's courtroom career. The game's opening episode, the first Turnabout, introduced the title character in a tutorialized murder trial. The second case, Turnabout Sisters, featured the Fae Clan, an all-female family of supposed spirit mediums. Turnabout Samurai gave breathing room to the game's ongoing narrative with a Hollywood-themed murder mystery, and the final case, Turnabout Goodbyes, brought Phoenix's past and present together in a thrilling finale, pitting him against one of the deadliest prosecutors on the planet. Phoenix was joined on his court appointments by his mentor, legendary defense attorney Mia Fey, who would lend a valuable guiding hand to players taking their first steps into Courtroom number 4. Mia's younger sister, Maya Fey, would also accompany Phoenix on his investigations, eventually becoming his second-in-command. The snarky spirit medium in training wasn't exactly the most perceptive assistant, but her unyielding energy and colorful commentary were integral to the game's sense of humor, full of exaggeration and wit. Having been developed and initially released only in Japan, Ace Attorney's Courtroom was a comically extreme take on bench trials, a version of the nation's judicial proceedings common at the turn of the 21st century. Instead of leaving a court case's outcome to a jury, the defense and prosecution present arguments through evidence and testimony to sway a presiding judge, who ultimately decides the defendant's fate. To rev up the stakes, Takumi designed the world of Ace Attorney to operate under the dystopian decree that every defendant is guilty until proven otherwise, possibly a passing jab at his home country's notoriously high conviction rate, which peaked at 99.9% in the mid-90s. With an equally ridiculous 3-day limit to trials, Phoenix had to clear his clientele's names as quickly as possible. But that would prove to be quite a task. Phoenix's time in the courtroom consisted of a central mechanic: cross-examinations. Witnesses called to the stand would give 3 to 5 lines of testimony, and as Phoenix, players would search through his inventory of items, called the court record, and present the piece of evidence that contradicted one of the given statements. Presenting the wrong evidence at the wrong statement led to a penalty from the judge. 5 penalties resulted in a guilty verdict and a game over. Stumped players could press witnesses for more information on each statement, which sometimes yielded revisions, new testimony, and even outright plot progression. Phoenix would also occasionally be prompted to present evidence outside of cross-examinations, place witnesses on crime scene layouts, and spotlight contradictions on relevant photographs. Ace Attorney was not a mechanically complex game, but it was never supposed to be. Takumi and the team sought to simplify the tedium commonly associated with the attorney profession, crafting a series of mysteries that would surprise and delight players through compelling characters and visibly striking design. Literally. Take that! Rather than dry back and forths between Phoenix and the acting prosecutor, Ace Attorney's courtroom debates were bombastic bouts of vicious verbal combat, front-loaded with visual and audible impact. Grand declarations and shocking revelations were accentuated by explosive sound design. Characters wouldn't simply concede an argument, they would convulse and recoil in pain, as if taking physical damage. When pushed to the brink, certain witnesses would lose composure in an emotional eruption. The now famous Ace Attorney Courtroom Breakdown. And, of course, whenever players presented evidence to contradict a witness's statement, the screen and sound would crackle with a stylized speech bubble that read in bold crimson letters the most important tool in Phoenix's arsenal. A single word. Objection! There were no action sequences or timed button presses in Ace Attorney. Instead of bullets or fists of fury, Phoenix fought back with his words and reasoning. Over the course of the game, Phoenix develops a curious ability to bluff his way to the truth, approaching each case from a vastly different angle and inflating his confidence to court the judge's attention. Akin to the recurring word in each case name, turning around his thinking was the only way Phoenix could combat a seemingly airtight alibi or an otherwise rock-solid explanation. More than once, Phoenix's bravado would be rewarded in spades, repeatedly rising from the ashes of near defeat. But an attorney's defense is only as good as their mettle with the opposing prosecutor. Objection! Designing Phoenix Wright's adversary was not an easy task for Takumi and the art team. At first, the prosecutor was written as a seasoned veteran of the courtroom, with over a decade of experience, but the team shot that idea down. Kumiko Suikane then suggested reframing the prosecutor as an actual rival to Phoenix, instead of just a recurring plot obstacle, and repositioning him near the center of the ongoing story. Takumi agreed, and began outlining the long, complicated history of 24-year-old prosecutor Reiji Mitsurugi, who would eventually come to be known as Miles Edgeworth. With his Victorian attire, unbreakable win record, and smug disposition, Edgeworth stood in stark contrast to plucky newcomer Phoenix, and their rivalry has become one of the most famous in the medium. The prosecutor prodigy was accompanied by his bumbling sidekick, Detective Dick Gumshoe, who would serve as chief investigator on every case in which Edgeworth was involved. Gumshoe was often the first person on the witness stand in a given trial, and his common-sense deficiency was crucial to easing players into the game's narrative puzzles. He also served as the introduction to Ace Attorney's investigation gameplay. When Phoenix wasn't in the courtroom, he and Maya would scour crime scenes for leads and potential clues. During these sequences, the game's perspective shifted to first person, in the vein of a traditional visual novel, allowing the developers to adopt a uniform character portrait presentation. Upon encountering witnesses at a location relevant to the case at hand, Phoenix could talk with them to gather information or present them with evidence from the court record. He could also examine the surrounding environment, which sometimes resulted in new evidence or just a quick exchange with his sassy sidekick. Without voice acting or even much sprite work, Ace Attorney's dialogue-heavy presentation needed to leave a lasting impression, so the developers incorporated a unique approach to the game's textual delivery. Instead of an unchanged rate like most visual novels, or most video games in general, the dialogue's pace would ebb and flow through context and characterization. Slight pauses between sentences, uncontrollably fast rambling, and awkward silences weren't just read, they were felt. Matching the dialogue's energy was each character's variety of poses and animations, minimal in quantity, but effective in expression. Many members of the supporting cast carried punny names that fit their comical designs, with standouts like Frank Sawit, Wendy Oldbag, and fan-favorite pathetic prosecutor Winston Payne. Beyond its idiosyncratic game design and appealing aesthetic, what truly elevated Ace Attorney was its sprawling story. Despite the lighthearted atmosphere, most of the witnesses, defendants, and even culprits carried a level of darkness and pathos that made solving each mystery far more than a simple endgame objective. And although the 4 cases were mostly standalone, 2 of them connected to the same traumatic event, cryptically titled the DL6 incident. Occurring 15 years prior to the events of the game, DL6 and its aftermath tied together the personal histories and motivations of almost every recurring character in the game. Though it wasn't his initial priority, Phoenix's first true mission as a defense attorney became uncovering the ugly truth behind DL6, in turn freeing those still haunted by its fallout. This astonishing level of character writing and in-game storytelling was ahead of its time, especially for a Game Boy Advance exclusive, and helped Gyakuten Saiban become an instant cult classic in Japan, selling a modest 60,000 copies by the end of 2001. Longtime gaming publication Famitsu Magazine awarded the game a very respectable 32 out of 40, citing its innovative gameplay and exhilarating pacing. Some critics were put off by the game's rigorous linearity and occasionally tedious investigation segments, but these gripes didn't stop Japan's Computer Entertainment Suppliers Association from awarding it at the 6th annual CESA Game Awards, where it placed alongside other 2001 hits like Kingdom Hearts and Metal Gear Solid 2. In 2016, Famitsu readers ranked it the second best Game Boy Advance game, only behind Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire. In the decades since its original release, Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney has been listed more than once as one of the greatest video games of all time. Ace Attorney wasn't supposed to work. Shu Takumi was explicitly told by his supervisor, the father of survival horror himself, that his offbeat lawyer game wouldn't grab an audience. Yet, through compelling narrative design and approachable puzzle gameplay, Takumi and his team had made one of the least game-like professions not only playable, but enjoyable. Takumi's quest to reinvent the adventure game resulted in a legacy he could call his own, one that was far from finished. On the next part of the Ace Attorney Retrospective, a one-off curiosity becomes a bona fide series. A power vacuum in the Faye family kicks off a body count, and a new courtroom nemesis whips Phoenix into shape.